By 1945, an interesting pattern emerged in veteran units. When offered American M1 Garand or Thompson submachine guns, Australian riflemen frequently declined. They'd rather keep their Lithgow SMLEs. This wasn't tradition or stubbornness, it was pragmatism born from years of combat. They'd learned to trust these rifles in situations where rifle failure meant death. The post-war period revealed the SMLE's true staying power. Korea brought frigid mountains. Malaya brought jungle insurgency. Vietnam brought both. Through all of it, Australian forces continued deploying Lithgow SMLEs in specialized roles: sniper rifles, ceremonial weapons, training rifles. The last combat use by Australian forces occurred in Vietnam, where some older reserve units still carried .303 rifles into the 1960s before transitioning to the L1A1 self-loading rifle. Production and service life. Lithgow Small Arms Factory, New South Wales. 1912 to 1953. 41 years of continuous SMLE production. Let's talk numbers. During World War I, Lithgow peaked at 30,500 rifles per year in 1915–16. Production slowed between wars but never stopped. When World War II erupted, Lithgow ramped up again, over 600,000 rifles during the war years. Compare that to British production. Enfield, Birmingham Small Arms, and London Small Arms combined produced millions, but they also produced other weapons, other priorities. Lithgow maintained focus. Production cost per rifle varied with materials and wartime inflation, but Australian records indicate each SMLE required approximately 50 to 60 man-hours of labour by 1940 standards. That's remarkably efficient for a precision military rifle. Modern estimates place the cost around £4 to £5 per rifle during World War II, affordable enough for mass issue, expensive enough to maintain quality. After World War II, something remarkable happened. While Britain and most Commonwealth nations phased out .303 rifles in favour of 7.62mm NATO weapons, Australia kept producing SMLEs. In 1953, Lithgow manufactured a final batch, 1,000 rifles dated 1953, though most receivers were stamped with 1953 dates. This wasn't mass production. It was a proof run, demonstrating that Lithgow could still produce the rifle if needed. Many of these 1953 dated rifles have become collector's items, marking the end of an era. Gun boards, 1953 Lithgow. But service didn't end in 1953. Far from it. Australian military stockpiles held hundreds of thousands of serviceable rifles. They flowed to reserve units, cadet corps, ceremonial duties. When Australia committed forces to Korea, 1950 to 1953, Malaya, 1950 to 1960, and even early Vietnam deployments, the SMLE remained standard issue for many units. The transition to the L1A1 self-loading rifle began in 1959, but complete replacement took decades. Cadet units used SMLE rifles for training until the mid-1970s. Today, surviving Lithgow SMLEs populate military museums, private collections, and shooting competitions worldwide. Australian examples command premium prices. Collectors recognise the superior build quality. A 1915 Lithgow SMLE in good condition sells for $800 to $1,500, compared to $300 to $600 for equivalent British rifles. Perhaps most telling, many Lithgow SMLEs manufactured in 1915 to 1920 remain fully functional today. Century-old rifles that still shoot accurately, still chamber rounds smoothly, still embody that peculiarly Australian philosophy: make it right once, and it lasts forever. The Lithgow SMLE taught Australian defence planners a lesson they never forgot: self-sufficiency matters. When Lithgow transitioned from SMLEs to L1A1 rifles in the late 1950s, they carried forward the same philosophy: domestic production to Australian specifications. The L1A1 SLR produced at Lithgow became known as possibly the finest variant of the FAL design. Tighter tolerances, better fit and finish, longer service life. Sound familiar? Modern Australian defence acquisition still reflects this legacy. The Ostia F88, essentially a licensed Steyr August, is manufactured domestically at Lithgow with Australian modifications. The EF88 that replaced it? Same story. Australia learned from 1912, never depend entirely on foreign supply chains for infantry weapons. Military historians point to the SMLE as proof that evolutionary design beats revolutionary design when backed by manufacturing excellence. The Lee Enfield wasn't the most advanced rifle of its era. German Mausers had stronger actions. American M1 Garands had semi-automatic fire. Soviet Mosin-Nagants had simpler logistics. But the SMLE, especially in Australian hands, outlasted them all in frontline service. The sniper variant, the No. 1 Mk3*HT, influenced post-war precision rifle development. The concept of adding a heavy barrel to improve accuracy became standard practice. Modern sniper rifles descended directly from this thinking, accuracy through barrel rigidity and consistent bedding. But perhaps the greatest legacy is cultural. Ask Australian veterans about their rifles, and you'll hear stories. Not specifications. Not ballistic tables. Stories about rifles that saved lives, never jammed when it mattered, took abuse that would destroy modern firearms and kept functioning. The Lithgow SMLE became part of Australian military identity, proof that a small nation could manufacture world-class weapons that matched or exceeded anything produced by imperial powers. Today, shooting clubs across Australia maintain Lithgow SMLEs in active competition use. These aren't display pieces. They're working rifles firing full power .303 loads weekly. Some have fired over 50,000 rounds. They're still accurate. Still reliable. Still embodying that original 1912 promise. Australian-made quality that lasts. 44.5 inches of wood and steel. A 10-round magazine that holds twice what enemies carried. A bolt that rotates 60 degrees while they're struggled through 90. This was the rifle that fired through Gallipoli's dust. This was the rifle that held the line at Fromelles when German waves broke against Australian positions. This was the rifle that Australian soldiers in Korea chose over American semi-automatics, because reliability beats innovation when your life depends on the next round chambering. The British made millions. The Australians made theirs better. And when Britain moved on to newer designs, Australian factories kept the lines running. 1912 to 1953, 41 years of continuous production. Not because they couldn't innovate. Because they already had. The Germans had their Mauser 98. The Americans had their Garand. The British had their progression of Enfields, each supposedly improved. Australia had one rifle they refined to perfection, then used it for half a century because perfect doesn't need replacing. In Korean frozen ridges, in Pacific jungles, in North African deserts, in European mud, when soldiers needed their rifles to work one more time against impossible odds, Lithgow SMLEs answered. Not with fancy mechanisms or revolutionary designs. Just with that smooth bolt, that 10-round magazine, that refusal to quit. Sometimes the best weapon isn't the newest. It's the one that never lets you down. The magazine deserves special attention. Unlike German Mausers with fixed 5-round magazines loaded via stripper clips, the Lee Enfield uses a detachable box that holds 2 full charges. Soldiers could theoretically carry preloaded magazines for instant reloading. In practice, most fed from charges while the magazine remained in the rifle, but that 10-round capacity meant fewer reloads under fire. The bolt mechanism. This is where the SMLE shines. 2 forward locking lugs engage the barrel extension, but the real innovation is the bolt throw, just 60 degrees from locked to unlocked. Compare that to the Mauser 98's 90-degree throw. That 30-degree difference translates directly into firing rate. An experienced rifleman never removes his cheek from the stock. The right hand works the bolt while the left hand steadies the rifle. One smooth motion, thumb lifts bolt handle, pull back to eject the spent case, forward to chamber the next round, push down to lock. The sound becomes rhythm. Click back forward click. The rear sight, graduated from 200 to 2,000 yards, though soldiers rarely engage past 600. The sight base sits on the barrel's rear bridge, allowing for quick windage adjustments in the field. Elevation changes via sliding ladder mechanism. Simple. Robust. Difficult to break. The safety, located on the left side of the receiver, operates with the left thumb while the rifle remains shouldered. Push up to fire, down for safe. No ambiguity. No complex mechanisms. Manufacturing specifications required 2,250 separate operations to produce one rifle. Lithgow workers assembled each rifle from components manufactured to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. When Britain's wartime factories cut corners to increase production, Lithgow maintained standards. The result? Rifles that lasted not 20 years, but 40. Now, if you're finding this interesting, consider subscribing. We are building something here for people who actually care about the details, not just the headlines, but the engineering, the combat reality, the stories that don't make it into textbooks. It takes a second, costs nothing, and helps the channel grow. Right. Back to Korea. April 1951. Private Ian Robertson of 3rd Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment, settles into a firing position overlooking Hill 614. His rifle, a Lithgow SMLE manufactured in 1917. It's been through 2 world wars. The wood shows wear. The bluing has worn off the receiver. But the bore? Still bright. The mechanism? Flawless. Robertson peers through his pattern 1918 telescope, 3x magnification, mounted offset to allow for stripper clip loading. It's a sniper configuration unique to Australian forces. Between November 1944 and February 1946, Lithgow produced approximately 1,612 of these modified rifles, designated No. 1 Mk3*HT, heavy telescopic. They added a heavy barrel, cheek piece, and that WWI-era scope. Other nations upgraded to modern optics. Australia? They made 1918 technology perform like 1950 precision. American rifleman, Australian Lee Enfield sniper. Robertson's first target falls at 300 yards. Then another. And another. Post-battle, American officers examining his rifle ask the obvious question, why aren't you using an M1 Garand? Robertson's answer, repeated by Australian soldiers throughout Korea, because this one works. That's not pride talking. It's statistics. The Korean War teaches lessons about rifle performance in extreme cold. American M1 Garand suffer from ammunition sensitivity. The EN block clips crack in sub-zero temperatures. British No. 4 rifles perform adequately, but require more maintenance than Australian units can provide in forward positions. The Lithgow SMLE? It keeps firing. The thick receiver walls handle Korean winters. The robust extractor doesn't snap under stress. When Chinese forces attack in waves at Kapyong and Mariang-san, Australian riflemen deliver sustained accurate fire with rifles older than the soldiers firing them. Sergeant Bill Jenkins of the 3rd Battalion later recalled, "The blokes loved their 303s. We'd been offered American weapons, but most refused. You don't change rifles mid-war when yours has never let you down." Wind the clock back. Western Front, 1916 to 1918. The Lithgow SMLE arrives in quantity just as the war devolves into industrial slaughter. At Posiers, Fromelles, Passchendaele, Australian soldiers learn that rifle reliability matters more than theoretical superiority. German Mausers hold 5 rounds. British SMLEs hold 10. In close-quarters trench fighting, that 5-round advantage means life or death. The Mad Minute becomes more than a training exercise, it's a survival skill. Australian troops could fire 20 to 25 aimed rounds per minute, double the German rate. When Australian battalions rotated out of the front lines, they left behind rifles caked in mud. Armourers would strip them down, expecting catastrophic wear. Instead, they found mechanisms that functioned despite conditions that would seize modern rifles solid. Gallipoli provided the first real-world test. On April 25, 1915, Australian forces landed at what became Anzac Cove armed primarily with British-manufactured SMLEs. Lithgow rifles arrived in 1916. The difference? Soldiers noticed. The Australian rifles had tighter tolerances, less rattle, smoother bolt operation, better accuracy at range. Not dramatic improvements, but measurable ones. When Turkish snipers engaged at 400 to 600 yards, Australian riflemen with Lithgow SMLEs held their own against Ottoman marksmen with telescopic-equipped Mausers. Here's what matters. The Lithgow SMLE didn't win wars through revolutionary technology. It won through sheer refusal to quit. While Britain transitioned to the No. 4 pattern in 1941, a further simplified design optimized for mass production, Australia stuck with the Mk3 Star. Why? Because they'd spent 30 years perfecting it. British factories produced No. 4 rifles faster and cheaper. Australian factories produced Mk3* rifles better. This created a peculiar situation by 1943. British Commonwealth forces were gradually transitioning to the No. 4. Canadian factories at Long Branch pumped out No. 4 rifles by the hundreds of thousands. Australian forces? Still carrying Mk3*S. And they preferred it that way. The strategic calculation was simple. Australia's industrial capacity couldn't match Britain or America. But they could maintain exceptional standards on one platform they knew intimately. Between 1912 and 1953, Lithgow produced approximately 600,000 SMLE rifles during World War II alone, with total production across all years exceeding estimates. These rifles flowed to Australian units fighting across multiple theatres: North Africa, Greece, Crete, Syria, Malaya, Papua New Guinea, Borneo. Each environment tested the rifle differently. The Libyan desert found no weakness. Papua New Guinea's humid jungles, where metal rusts overnight and with swells, couldn't stop it. Borneo's coral dust didn't jam the action. Compare this to American experience with the M1 Garand in the Pacific. Superb rifle. Semi-automatic. But the gas system required meticulous cleaning in jungle conditions. The EN block clip pinged when empty, alerting Japanese soldiers to reload timing. Australian SMLEs? Manual operation meant nothing to break. No gas ports to clog. No complex mechanisms to fail. Just bolt, barrel, and determination. April 1951. Hill 614, Korea. Private Ian Robertson watches through his scope. 300 yards. A Chinese soldier emerges from the tree line. Robertson's finger rests on the trigger of a rifle that shouldn't exist, not anymore. Britain stopped making these in 1945. America never wanted them. Yet here, in the frozen ridges north of the 38th parallel, Australian snipers clutched weapons manufactured when their grandfathers were still at Gallipoli. Robertson squeezes. The man drops. He works the bolt, smooth as silk after 35 years of service. Another target. Another round. The heavy barrel barely shifts. When American advisors examined Robertson's rifle after the battle, they found something impossible. A Lithgow SMLE manufactured in 1917, still driving nails at 300 yards. The British had moved to the No. 4. The Americans carried Garands. But the Australians? They kept feeding .303 rounds into rifles that predated both world wars, and kept winning with them. Historical context. The British Empire spans a quarter of the globe. But there's a problem Australia can't ignore. Every rifle, every cartridge, every bayonet comes from Britain. 14,000 miles away across submarine-infested oceans. The Australian Defence Committee runs the numbers. If war erupts, British factories will prioritise British troops. Australian soldiers will queue for scraps. The solution isn't stockpiling, it's self-sufficiency. On June 24, 1912, the Lithgow Small Arms Factory opens in the New South Wales Highlands, 90 miles west of Sydney. It's the first high-precision mass production facility in the Southern Hemisphere. The timing proves prophetic. 2 years later, Europe ignites. By 1915, Australian troops are bleeding on Turkish beaches at Gallipoli, pinned down by Ottoman riflemen using German Mausers. The British SMLEs they carry? Manufactured in Enfield, Birmingham, London, anywhere but Australia. When casualty rates spike, Australia can't wait for replacement rifles to sail from Portsmouth. They need weapons yesterday. Lithgow begins ramping up. In the 1915-16 financial year alone, the factory produces 30,500 rifles, the highest rate of the entire Great War. These aren't just British SMLEs built under license. They're Australian-made instruments of war, flowing to battalions on the Western Front where Australian diggers face a strategic reality that will define the SMLE's legend. They're outgunned, but outnumbered doesn't mean outfought. Lithgow Small Arms Factory Museum. Let's talk about what makes a rifle effective in 1915. It's not just accuracy. It's reliability under conditions that would destroy lesser weapons. At Gallipoli, Australian troops discover this truth in the worst classroom imaginable, beach landings under Turkish fire, where sand clogs mechanisms and saltwater corrodes metal overnight. The British Enfield SMLE Mk3 arrives with promises. 10-round magazine. Fast bolt action. But it carries complications. A magazine cutoff that soldiers never use, long-range volley sights accurate to 2,800 yards that nobody fires at, windage adjustments on rear sights that gunpowder residue locks solid after 3 days in the trenches. Compare this to what Australian soldiers face. German Mauser 98, 5-round magazine. Requires complete bolt withdrawal. Rate of fire, 15 rounds per minute with a trained rifleman. Turkish rifles, mix of Mausers and older patterns. Reliable, but slow. British SMLE Mk3, 10-round magazine. Smooth bolt action requiring only 60-degree rotation. Theoretical rate of fire, 20 to 30 aimed rounds per minute in what British troops call the mad minute. But there's a catch. All those extra features add manufacturing time and failure points. At the First Battle of Mons in 1914, German troops report facing British machine guns. They're wrong. It's just massed rifle fire from soldiers who trained until their fingers bled. But can that performance sustain through weeks in mud-filled trenches? Can those complex mechanisms survive Australian conditions, not just European mud, but Pacific humidity, North African sand, Korean frost? The answer comes from soldiers' letters and war diaries. Rifles that jam during the mad minute. Rear sights that freeze. Magazine cutoffs that break off entirely. By 1916, the British War Office reaches a conclusion. The SMLE Mk3 is too complicated for wartime production. They introduce the Mk3*, a simplified pattern that eliminates the magazine cutoff, volley sights, and windage adjustments. The asterisk after 3 denotes an official modification pattern. It's faster to manufacture, more reliable in combat, less precise on paper, but soldiers don't fight on paper. American Rifleman. Australia faces a choice. Stick with the complicated Mk3 they've been making, or switch mid-war to the simplified pattern. They choose pragmatism. Australian rifles begin carrying that asterisk, the Mk3 star. But Australia does something else. Something that will define their rifles for the next 4 decades. They make them better. The Lithgow Small Arms Factory wasn't built by gunsmiths or military engineers. It was designed by American machinery experts who brought precision manufacturing techniques to the Australian bush. When British officials toured the facility in 1913, they were astonished. These colonials had leapfrogged decades of British manufacturing tradition with American technology. The first Lithgow SMLE rolled off the assembly line in late 1912. Serial number 1. No prefix. Just one single number that would grow to hundreds of thousands. But it's not the first rifle that matters, it's the refinements that come after. Australian engineers study failure reports from the front. They note British rifles with cracked stocks, worn extractors, broken firing pins. So they make changes. Subtle ones. A slightly different steel alloy here. Tighter tolerances there. Furniture wood sourced from Australian hardwoods that handle humidity better than European walnut. No single person invented the Lithgow SMLE. Its evolution through incremental improvement, guided by combat feedback flowing back from Gallipoli, France, Flanders. When a rifle fails, Lithgow wants to know why. They adjust specifications. Test extensively. The goal isn't innovation, it's reliability that outlasts wars. By 1918, Lithgow rifles carry a quiet reputation. They're heavier than British equivalents, sometimes by 8 ounces. Australian metalworkers don't skimp on steel. The barrels run slightly thicker. The result? Rifles that weigh 9 pounds 2 ounces instead of 8 pounds 10 ounces, but shoot straighter after 5,000 rounds and don't warp under sustained fire. The Great War ends. British factories wind down SMLE production. But Lithgow? They keep the lines running. Because Australian military planners learned the lesson of 1914, Never depend entirely on distant suppliers. Technical breakdown. Let's get specific. Strip away the mythology and examine what made the Lithgow SMLE Mk3* a mechanical marvel. Overall length, 44.5 inches, 1,130 mm, barrel length, 25.2 inches, 640 mm, weight unloaded, 9 pounds 2 ounces, 4.1 kilograms, for Lithgow variance caliber, .303 British, 7.7 by 56 mm rimmed, rifling, 5 grooves, left-hand twist. 1 turn in 10 inches magazine capacity, 10 rounds in detachable box magazine muzzle velocity, 744 meters per second, 2,441 feet per second, effective range, 550 yards, 503 meters, with iron sights maximum range, 3,000 yards, 2,743 meters.